Well, there's a lot of people, I think, in the room because the documentary, I think, really impressed a lot of people who had followed from Serial to Undisclosed and people who are new to the story. So how did initially the idea come together to make a documentary about Adnan's story?
So, I want to say that, nothing's a coincidence and it's this weird divine providence how this all happened, but I don't know if some of you know how Serial came together, and what happened with Serial was that one night I was watching the West of Memphis documentary on Netflix, 2013, I think. And when I got done watching it, I noted that there's this incredible director named Amy Berg who made this documentary. And it wasn't just a documentary, it was an investigative journey. She really tried to figure out what happened to those 3 little boys in that terrible case. And I turned off Netflix when I was done, and I was just devastated, but I said, I really need to find a good journalist, an investigative journalist. I was like, let me see if there's somebody in the area. And that night is the night I just popped open my laptop and I found Sarah Koenig. That, obviously, search led to Serial. Serial led to Undisclosed. It also led to a book that I wrote and Adnan contributed to, yeah. Thank you for that one person. And when it was announced that the book was going to be published, a number of people wanted to option the book. And this one production company that I have a lot of respect for, based out of the UK, were interested. And I said I would be comfortable going with them. And then 2 months later, they called me and said, we just want you to know Amy Berg's going to direct this. And so it was like this big full circle. Like 4 or 5 years later, I'm like, this is not a coincidence.
Did you even think that she might be attracted to this project?
I couldn't even believe it. I couldn't believe, because of all the people. And I remember saying to Adnan, we couldn't have asked for these ducks to be lined up in a better, it was just every single kind of piece we wanted, because you never know when you're turning over the story to filmmakers, to anybody, like what that could look like. But I knew with Amy, for her, it wasn't just about kind of making a sensational piece or just kind of documenting what had happened, but she spent 3 years trying to figure out what really happened on January 13th of 1989.
And I'm really glad that the show is not like a hour-long documentary, hour-and-a-half-long documentary, but there's enough time to explore 4 episodes of what we found and covered.
We wish it could have been like 10, but anyway.
Yeah, that would have been great too.
Well, in the process of kind of converting the content from the initial reporting from the case, from the content that's in a podcast to one that's on screen, what are some of the considerations when you're trying to tell a story like that visually?
Well, first of all, we got to see firsthand like how the sausage is made, and that was a really odd experience. Because I always thought, documentary, they just follow you around where you go. But it's no, you gotta walk into that room 5 times and get it right. Rabia, can you walk into the room again? Okay.
Man, there's one scene where I'm walking up a stairway, and it's like 3 floors. And I had to do that stairway like 5 times. But then I was like, no, Amy, I cannot physically get up the stairway one more time.
With the camera right under Susan's butt.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it.
No, but what Amy had to do was really hard, because she had to really synthesize like so much. You had to tell the backstory, the present story, the Serial part of the story. Like there was so much for her to like kind of squeeze in, but I think she did such a great job. And I thought one of the most impactful things about this was, hundreds of millions of people listen to Serial. Not everybody are true crime junkies like you guys. So not everybody knows like kind of like what the players look like and who we are as, kind of as people. And so I think seeing us in real life had an impact on people. And especially for me, I think the most important thing was getting Adnan's father on film. Yeah. Because he is just so, he has turned himself into a hermit over the years, and he's so shy of everybody. And the fact that, and it took Amy a while, maybe a year and a half, of building a relationship with him to get him to trust her enough and be comfortable with her and her crew enough to finally be filmed. And when I used to say, you don't understand, Adnan's father's like Father Time, he's like a sweet, sweet, gentle old man. Like I'm so glad we were able to capture like him and what all of this has done to him.
One of the things that I think is, sometimes I meet someone who says, like, I didn't listen to Serial, and I think, really? Who hasn't listened to Serial? Or if they'll say, I listened to 2 episodes and then I stopped, and I'm like, what's wrong with you, right? Because it's such a compelling narrative, and then everything that happens as a result. And so in terms of making sure that the film stood on its own, and had its own content, especially after so many years. What were some of the things in the series that surprised you, whether it's the participation of individuals or the new elements of the story that they added?
Well, let me just first make it clear that even though the book was optioned and I got an executive producer credit, and Susan and Colin, and we wish Colin was here, but we can all send him some love, our third colleague from Undisclosed. They did consult on the film as legal consultants, but we did not, just like Syria, we had no idea kind of like what was going to be in. So when we saw it at the end of the whole production of the series, we were like, there were times when I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What happened? What just happened? There were some moments, but I'll let Susan address some of the things that surprised her.
Well, we knew a lot of the parts, at least I did, like what was going to be in the final version, but I didn't have any sense of how it was going to come together, what it was going to look like in the end. So even the parts that I knew are the reveals that I was already aware of, I was still surprised to see how it played on the screen. And Amy just did such an amazing job of layering the story, having like the 2 or 3 different strains of the story come together in a way that makes you see how all the pieces actually fit, which I was amazed by. In terms of things that were surprising, well, there was the whole Debbie issue was one I did not necessarily expect coming up. And when I heard from Amy about it, I was like, are you sure? And she's like, oh yeah, I'm sure. Because I know when Serial came out and we were looking at the transcripts, there was a lot about Debbie's story that was hard to understand. And her testimony did change in a way that did not help Adnan's case, which I wondered about as well. And she's she's not someone we spoke to for our show for Undisclosed, so I knew less about her. But from her original interviews back in '99, she seems to be very familiar with Don. She talks about their 7-hour-long phone call, calls him Donnie, and we always wondered what was happening there, but didn't really expect, yeah.
Oh yeah, that shocked me. We didn't know about Donnie's spring break visit to the campus, and it's interesting in that scene, you can see Debbie's face kind of change when she talks about him and thinks about him. Mm-hmm. Like there was something there, something happened. I don't know exactly what happened, but something happened. It happened very shortly after he disappeared.
And this was the first time you had ever heard of this, because it seems like there was a lot of secrets that were out in the open, right? There was a lot of gossiping, there's a large friend group. But how do you think that element managed to stay quiet for so long?
I don't know. And there's also these other little bits in the case file that I still don't think we have a full answer for. But there's one note from the police taken on an unknown date where they wrote, Hayes' girlfriends don't like new boyfriend. New boyfriend assaulted Debbie. Still have no idea who wrote why that was written. But obviously someone at some point talked to the police, is like, we don't like Hayes' new boyfriend Don. He assaulted Debbie.
Yeah. We had these notes, and we had the note about the 7-hour conversation. I remember Susan's like, maybe it's a typo. 7 hours.
I didn't say that.
For 7 hours.
It makes more sense, right?
Somebody wrote it down wrong. I'm like, but no, it really happened. So, the interesting thing about this group that you're talking about, well, I think a lot of this group just kind of fell apart, really, after. They just kind of all went their own ways. We know Stephanie.
They went to college.
They went to college, but also, I think Hayes' death and disappearance, had a real impact on these young people at the time. I think it really traumatized them. Stephanie, we were told after Hay was found, her body was found, and Adnan was arrested, that she kind of just went off the map. She refused to talk about any of it to anybody, which is kind of, she knew Adnan since they were, I think, in 2nd grade together. And she knew Hay for many years. And so, but she wouldn't talk about it. And so that was the end of her kind of being part of that friends group. Aisha Pittman, lost her best friend. Debbie was, kind of part of that group, but Adnan had been arrested. The group kind of fractured in a way. So if there were stories, and I wonder also if Debbie had told anybody about what happened during spring break. I don't know if she had. But it also seemed like she didn't have no regrets about it even today. So.
Well, one of the things, I think for people who saw it, of all the people you expected to see, I don't know if you expected to see Debbie.
Yeah.
And the ways that she kind of just opened up. In the process of making the film, did you know that these friends of Hay and Adnan were even being interviewed, or the kind of things that they were talking about? Were you aware of that?
I knew Debbie had agreed to be interviewed. I didn't know the extent of it. I didn't know how many times she was interviewed. I didn't know the content of her interview. I really didn't. And I also did my best to kind of stay as far away as, I mean, you know, just give them the independence and stuff. I didn't want to be like up in the business constantly.
Yeah, you did.
Business.
You just didn't.
Well, okay, I did, but I didn't do it. So no, and we knew, for example, that they weren't able to get a hold of Stephanie. Like we knew when they tried and they couldn't do it. Yeah, to that extent, we knew that information. I don't know if Susan knew any more than I do. She might have.
Yeah, I mean, I was helping with the investigation, so Amy would let me know things and tell me about how stuff was going, like when they were trying to talk to Jay. Like up until the very last minute, we were still hoping they could like get him on film and get him in the documentary. I think it was definitely this year. It was 2019 when it finally was like, okay, it's not going to happen. They tried really hard.
Yeah.
He was not cooperative, but yeah.
I knew when they went out to see Don. They told me after the fact that they had gone to talk to him. But that they couldn't get him on film. Yeah, except for that really long
shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that, for people who listen to Undisclosed so carefully, myself included, I was just so impressed by the volume of evidence and the volume of information that you were able to bring together in this really coherent way. And so in terms of, in the time from when Undisclosed Season 1 ended and when this film was presented to a broad audience, there's all of these different kind of evidentiary elements that rose to the surface. Of all of the things that were in the documentary, what new pieces of evidence did you find most compelling or important for a larger audience to understand?
For me, it's Christy, not her real name, Kathy.
Wait, what's her name?
Oh, yeah.
Chris Stevens.
I keep on forgetting.
Okay, yeah. Her name's Christy now. Call her Christy.
Okay.
Can't call her Kathy.
Not her real name, Kathy. Okay.
Not her real name, Kathy.
Not her real name, Kathy, is Christy. And she is someone, even like I think the first 2 episodes of Undisclosed, we focused on because her story has been consistent. She seems sincere and genuine and credible. But her story is such at odds with Jay's story and Jen's story that it kind of became an obsession for a bit, trying to understand how her story could possibly fit together with the others. Because I believed her. Like what she was saying was over many years the same again and again. And she didn't have a reason to lie. She was not involved with Jay this way. So when I started looking at her statements and her stories from 99, from the trial, it seemed to me like she was talking about the wrong day. Nothing she said matched how Jen or Jay or anyone else described the events of the 13th. And a lot of what she said seemed to date this occurrence where Adnan came to her house with Jay and was super high at some other time. And, one thing I wish they'd done better back in 99 was to, 1, look at her schedule, and 2, figure out what conference she'd gone to. Because the conferences she's described and recalled, there is not one. So she says that the day this all happened, she's at a conference for her internship, came home. That's when Jay and Adnan came over. There is no conference that can fit her memory that happened on the 13th or right around there. So whatever day this happened on to me was not that. Well, then we have Amy get in there and she wins Christy's trust. It took a while, but Christy finally agreed that I think Christy wanted to know too. I think Christy just really wanted to have an answer as well. So she ended up agreeing to sign some forms and give permission to Amy and the team to pull her school records. Because they couldn't obviously get that without Christy's involvement. So she signed that and they got him back. And they show that Christy had a class that evening at the same time, during the exact block of time that supposedly Jay and Adnan were over at her place. And she could not have missed that class and pass the course.
And in that moment where she realizes what happened, I mean, if you watched as closely,
It's heavy.
It's incredible. And do you think that's a result of coaching or wanting to believe a story over all these years? What do you think is at the heart of that reaction? Because it's so powerful.
Amy hadn't told me that they found this document or her school records.
I just assumed you knew.
I had no idea. So I didn't know until I watched it. And I just jumped off the sofa. I was like, what the, I was pretty convinced she had the wrong day because of the things that Susan had found in the past in her schedule, and she was confused. But that kind of sealed it. And you could see her face was just like the realization of having been so convinced of something and realizing it's, this happens to us all the time. I mean, all of us have experienced being like, I know X, Y, Z happened, or I saw, and then being shown a photograph or something, and you're like, crap, I got it completely wrong. It has happened to me plenty of times. It's a very human thing to do. It's how fallible our memories are. But in this case, also, what happened was the police were kind of convincing witnesses that, that to plug in their memories into a certain narrative, and that's not uncommon. And when you have nothing but your memory to rely on, remember the police also, if she had said, well, I had a conference that day, I did this, I did that, I mean, it wouldn't have been that hard for the police or prosecutors or the investigator or the defense attorney in 1999 to try to corroborate it, but nobody did, right? So what happened to her is not uncommon. It's even people who are actual eyewitnesses get stuff wrong all the time. It's just how our brains work. So I don't think she was coached. I think when she relayed probably to the detectives that I remember this guy coming over one time and being high with Jay, they're thinking it had to be that day.
They told her it was the 13th. They told her it was the 13th and she accepted it.
Right.
As
So
she
they're
says, I wish they had filmed the pre-interview, and then they'd see my doubts and how I was not sure about things till they told me them.
And that was also, by the way, new news. Oh, there's a pre-interview nobody ever knew
There's always a
about?
pre-interview.
There's always a pre-interview. But the fact that there was a pre-interview, and the fact that this is even a process that exists is complete and utter bullshit. Because it means
It's rehearsal.
It's rehearsal. That is the portion at which, you get your witness in their most authentic kind of state, right? Where you can really figure out what do they really know and not know, and what are they given by the police. And
in a more kind of meta sense, part of, in Serial they say, how do you track what a group of teenagers are doing before social media, before cell phone use is really broad? And one of the things I wonder is, these practices still exist today, even when we have a digital time set or record of what we're doing and where we're doing, you still can convince people of quite a bit. And so watching that part of it, what are the other things that kind of emerged in the documentary that made you kind of stand up a little bit straighter?
Jay had a new story.
Of course, yeah.
What's that about? My God.
Jay had a new story, yeah.
No, I think that it is actually physically impossible for him to say the same story twice. As far as I'm aware, it's never happened, it never will. Anytime you interview Jay, you're gonna get a new story.
And is that allowed, right? If you were a prosecution witness in such a serious case, can you just, after the fact, say, well, it happened this way, it happened that way, it happened that way?
Obviously you can.
Apparently you can.
You can say kind of whatever you want. I mean, earlier I met one of the attendees here, and she was saying, can't he be prosecuted for perjury? And I said, what happens, when there's stuff on the record in front of the court, like from 1999, 2000, that's the universe of facts that keeps following you until this whole thing ends. It doesn't matter what happens in the real world, in a way, right? Until it's introduced into the record in the legal system, it doesn't matter. What Jay said in 99 is what Jay said in 99. Doesn't matter what he says today. We had to find a way to get Jay's new statements before a court and entered into the record, so he can say all kinds of things. What he said, and if he does, then will the state decide to charge him with perjury if he says, I lied on the stand? They could, would they? Unlikely, because I would guess Jay would say, well, I lied because y'all forced me to. I lied because the police made me. I lied because I was threatened or coerced, which has happened in Baltimore by the same detectives. We know that in other cases. But I think one of the things that what surprised me about the conversation that he had with the director that they captioned at the end was he said, the police told him about Best Buy. Now, I think it was in his Intercept interview where he said he had been told it happened at Best Buy, but he wasn't this clear. Now he's like, the police told me it happened at Best Buy.
And of course, for Jen, she also is back in Serial Day, she's saying, well, the one part I didn't believe about the story was the Best Buy thing. So there's been doubts about the Best Buy for a long time.
Do you think the origins of that is when the French teacher, Hope Schaub, was being an undercover detective public school teacher? Are you kidding me? Right? I hope everyone is really concerned by that gesture of having a high school teacher feel very empowered and encouraged to just get information. Do you think that's the origin of Best Buy into this narrative?
Look, the police had a lot of holes to plug in. They had to figure out where he found her, how they came across each other, where they were. They had to present a story to the jury. They can't just say, well, he killed her, and that's it. Then he buried her with Jay. We don't know where, when, how, what. So I think when Hope was able to get that information that they would hook up at Best Buy or meet up there, that they're like, okay, well that's close enough. That's maybe probably where it happened. And personally, I don't think anything happened at Best Buy on January 3rd. Like, I don't think anybody was ever there that day. I don't think, it's just completely fabricated. So, but they just had to plug in the holes.
Yeah. And then, but why did they ever say it originally? I mean, just so Jen had her first interview, and she's the one who says, he said it was Best Buy. Jay does not say that in his first interview. He has a story about, the strip and all that. Then he goes back to the Best Buy story. And when they're trying to go to trial and fix Jay's story, they have to explain why he lied about a lot of things. So they come up with reasons about why he lied about this, why he lied about that. He was protecting friends. The one thing they can't ever get Jay to explain is why he lied or changed his story to Best Buy. His answer, I think, at trial is something like, because I heard there were cameras there.
Right, nobody,
So they can't explain it. I mean, there's something that was just inserted in the story and it was stuck and they could never find a reason to explain how it happened.
yeah.
In terms of kind of also rethinking characters that were introduced very early on into the podcast and different narratives about it was Mr. S. And I thought the Mr. S angles were a little bit more interesting in terms of thinking of his home's proximity to the school and to his workplace and some of those elements. What did you make of the inclusion of new questions about Mr. S in the documentary?
I was hoping Amy could work her magic and get Mr. S in the record. I wasn't optimistic. We tried. This is years ago. We had a private investigator and we tried to get interviews, statements from Mr. S, Alonzo Sellers. And
I know.
Alonzo Sellers,
This is what happens, yes.
And it didn't happen. Like, he was not going to talk. You saw him on the documentary. That guy he knew he had to be there. He was subpoenaed. He could not show up, but he was not going to be cooperative. Well, when he's not subpoenaed, he's not going to say a single word. But it's very clear to me that Mr. S, Alonzo Sellers, has more of the story that he's never shared. His story about what happened and how he found the body is not true. It's a lie. There are different reasons why he could be lying, but all of them indicate that Mr. S has more knowledge about this than he's ever said before. So there is a big piece of the puzzle that he knows and will never tell us.
Yeah. I'm really glad because you actually got to see the video of his testimony. And, I want to point to like a bigger issue here that we haven't talked about yet, but I think it's important for people to understand. For HBO to air that court footage, like they had to break a rule. In Maryland, although proceedings can be recorded, audio and video, they can't be broadcast. Now, there's no public policy reason for that. That shouldn't be a thing. And undisclosed, like we are now in litigation, we're fighting this.
Well, not really. We just did it.
We just did it.
We told the court first. We wrote to the court and said, here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're going to do it. Let us, inviting them to engage in conversation. And
So are there penalties tied to?
we'll find out.
We could be held in contempt. I mean,
Technically, it could be criminal.
But look, Sarah Canning did it in Serial. She aired some audio. She got in trouble. She's like, sorry, and that was the end of that. With Undisclosed, we decided to go ahead and do it. HBO did it. But there's a reason. Look, if you read Sellers' testimony versus seeing him testify, there's a huge difference in understanding the witness's tone, his attitude, like what's really happening in the courtroom. And it's important. It is important to this, to this case and to every case. And that's why we think it is, as a matter of public policy, it's important. So I hope you guys kind of follow that whole thread too, as we're fighting this in Maryland and other states. This should not be a thing. Our tax dollars are paying for that shit. We should be able to see it. Back to Sellers. So his antagonism was so evident in his testifying. But I want to give Tevi a little backstory. When Amy went to go interview him, he was riding his riding mower in his front lawn, and he almost ran her over. Because that's how angry he was. He was like, get off my lawn, I will run you over. Like he is so adamant about not saying a word about this. And that obviously is weirdly suspicious. If you were just an uninterested witness, why can't you just be like, well, this is what happened. I found the body. I'm glad I contacted the police. There's something else there. But also, I wish the documentary had done something that they didn't do, which is kind of visually show what it would have taken for him if his story was true. Yeah. Like where he pulled his car over, which would have been on the opposite side of the street.
So you did this with Sarah Canning a little bit in Serial, and then you did it again, went to the site. Is that right?
With what?
You went to the site of where he found the body.
I didn't go with Sarah.
Oh, you didn't?
I didn't. And I didn't go with the crew either. They did on their own. But I'm saying if they had actually taken the camera crew and say, let's recreate what happened and have the camera, like in a car, pull over to the other wrong side of the road, then cross the road, then walk 100 yards or 120 yards in through the bramble and be like, okay, this is all, it took this much effort for him to take that leap. Okay?
He's a shy person, Rabia.
He's a shy person. Yeah, it took superhuman effort to take that leap. I mean, like, to kind of show the absolute improbability of his story, I think would have been great. But
Not the drive, too. I mean, his story is that he went home from work, had a 22, a beer, and drank it on his way back to work, and then had to go to the bathroom, so he pulled over. But, like, his house was, like, 2 minutes where he left before, and his work was, like, 2 minutes down the road. So,
And this one,
really?
this is a person who had been previously arrested for indecent exposure.
the bunny man,
So
that's what they called him.
he would
he's
maybe-
not that shy.
Right. So I mean, just something, just
that
to put it in a context. But it seems like at every twist and turn of this investigation, there's something that feels so improbable and so unlikely.
Yeah.
But they make it fit, and they make it fit. If you were to have ultimate supreme power over everything in the world, what are some things that were not in the documentary, like what you were saying that you wish had been included?
Well, not necessarily stuff that I'd want to be included, but there was a lot of really interesting material that couldn't make it because the documentary focused on the things that were ironclad. The evidence, the statements, the things that they had no doubts about and were utterly certain of. If there was a tiny bit of speculation, it did not go in the HBO documentary, as it shouldn't have. So there were a lot of things that were, to me, are fascinating, and I would really look a lot more into them. But the documentary was not the place to cover it, no matter how intriguing they were. Like the helicopter.
The helicopter. So this is a story I think most people are not going to be familiar with, and I think it's important to kind of like lay out the context. So there's some, when we talk about like how Jay knew where the car is, I have my own theory here, but there's some evidence to suggest in the case file that, well, it's not evidence suggests, it's evidence that, a helicopter search was ordered.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, in Baltimore County, right? In Baltimore County, a helicopter search was ordered to look for Hayes' car when they hadn't found her car yet, or I don't know if it was before or after they found her body. No, before or after they found her body, I'm not sure. But there's no results. It's just like a report that says we're ordering a helicopter search. We have no idea when it was done, where it was done, what happened. Well, Amy dug deep into that, and she sent her investigators on that trail, and they they shockingly found a gentleman who said, "Oh, I remember that search.
The pilot.
The pilot. I did that search, and we found the car."
At the park and ride.
Yeah.
So the sole setup about how they found the car through Jay's testimony or a helicopter, no distinction was made. And was this ever discussed at trial?
No, they never knew until Amy and them found it. And they couldn't verify it. They could not verify the guy's story. They couldn't actually, all the documents were gone. I think there was a fire at what was the agency? It was not the Maryland police. It was like a state agency. And
Yeah.
they had lost all their records. So there were no documents left to verify any of it.
But there's the pilot. He's
Who-
like, dude, I remember doing this.
Also, yeah,
But here's what happened. So this was a huge break. If this was true, this would have been like a huge break in the case because I don't know, that could be potentially Brady, it could be all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But that would definitely show that Jay did not know where the car was and the police did. But the next day, after actually giving this interview to Amy, the pilot came back and said, I was confused. It was a different case. And we don't know. It's always like, did somebody get to you? Like, what? You know what I mean? Like,
How often is a helicopter search used in Baltimore County in this way?
yeah, that's a great
In
question.
the
to ask.
1990s?
Because, yeah. Well, and also a lot of people from Woodlawn recall, so no one back then at the school really knew all the facts of the case. They didn't go to trial. They didn't know about Jay. They didn't even know Jay was involved in this.
Yeah.
So they only had bits and pieces of the story. A lot of them remember being told the car was found at the park and ride. They just assumed that's where it was found because that's what people said back then for some reason.
Yeah. Now, let's say it was found at the park and ride, and the police are like, well, we're going to move it from the park, or somebody's going to move it from the park and ride and leave it where it was found. I don't understand what the reason.
They got photos and only realized later that it was there. I mean, it's hard without any documents or anything to go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say this, if we get back in court, I will have that pilot subpoenaed.
Well, there's got to be record of it.
Well, no, it's burned down.
It burned down. How
No,
convenient.
there's not record of it, unfortunately. So that
Memory
is a
hasn't
very vexing dead end.
So after and I want to make sure, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and we're going to open it up for Q&A.
We should talk about the DNA, though.
Can we? Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting that was one of the ways that kind of Serial left it with the Innocence Project and DNA, and if we get to it, and then the film does similar things.
Yeah.
What is the kind of story about the DNA analysis at present?
Well, the state was waiting for the decision from Supreme Court of Maryland, and they thought they were going to lose.
Yeah.
So they were willing to cooperate, and they were willing to take chances and do things that they hadn't been willing to do before, like test the DNA. So that's how that came about.
This happened, I think, last fall or late summer, is where the state, everybody anticipated the state's going to lose, right, at the Court of Appeals in Maryland. And the state was talking about making him an offer, but I think just to kind of cover their bases, they're like, maybe we should run the DNA. Oh yeah, after all these years. Also, shockingly, oh, you guys actually have the physical evidence, which we didn't know whether they had or not.
They had told Justin when he asked back in 2009, around then?
In 2009.
Right when he first came on the case, he tried to get the physical evidence, and they're like, we can't
It's all
find it.
gone.
I can't promise you it's gone, so I didn't have records showing it was definitely destroyed, but it's probably destroyed.
Yeah, we got a letter in 2009 saying the physical evidence has been destroyed. So we did try in 2009 to do testing then, and that was a dead end. So it was shocking to hear that, oh no, it's not destroyed, we have it. So they ran it, and you know, the thing is they didn't do DNA testing on every single piece of physical evidence. They somehow collaborated, the state and Justin, on the items to pick to run the DNA test.
And we don't know if they even have all the items.
Yeah,
Well, for instance, like the trunk liner from Adnan's car was destroyed in a flood somehow, so they couldn't test it for DNA. No idea
I
how
just
that
think
happened.
you keep the evidence of a case in the same place. I
Well,
mean, like, whose
I mean,
basement is his liner in? I don't know.
I think this is why this stuff is so helpful for a larger audience to know. Like, it isn't as neat and orderly as it is on television.
Oh, it's a hot
it is
mess.
never,
And so
ever.
it's like, and so
It's a
I mean,
hot
this is everyone's tax dollars and their good, their public will at work. And so evidence is everywhere, and you can't even get a straight answer as to what evidence you have left.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are plenty of police departments out there that have nicely organized evidence files and everything's stored.
And climate
conveniently
controlled.
with- I have not gotten a case in one of those places yet.
Interesting. Interesting.
So they test the DNA, nothing matches Adnan, they make the plea offer, okay? Now, you asked earlier, like, if I had a magic wand, like, what would I do? I would take what they found and do the genetic genealogy stuff, on it. I wish we could use that database. And it's not that we can't. They now have those profiles. They have a couple of profiles. Well, they have one full female profile and one partial profile.
Possibly more. We don't even know exactly what was found. So what we have right now is a very, very high-level summary of what the DNA analysts found. We don't have all the underlying documents. We don't have the underlying testing. We don't know we don't know if they got, how much of the samples they got were they something we could use to identify someone, even if we couldn't put it into CODIS. We don't know any of that. What we do know is there's for sure one full profile. We know it's a female profile. We know it was found on the rope, which is really 2 pieces of tan wire. And we know that there were some partial profiles of unknown partialness that were found on various items.
And I believe there's like an allele under a fingernail.
That's
right. But so the point is, it's not that there's nothing. There's stuff. There's something. It could lead to something or it could lead to nothing. But what the state said was, and this is what just makes me crazy, like, well, we ran it, didn't match him, nothing matched him, we're done. Well, don't you kind of want to know, like, who it belongs to? Why would you stop there? But they're like, we're done with this. So what that means is that we have to somehow compel the state. They have no reason to want to negotiate now anymore because we've lost the appeal. We have no leverage really on that end. So it would probably take us basically filing in court and trying to force them, and that could take years.
It would take years.
It will take years.
Baltimore's notorious for fighting requests for DNA. There's another case that I think about a lot, Malcolm Bryant. He was arrested in 98 for a murder. Detective Ritz, same detective as in Adnan's case, was the detective. And he was seeking DNA testing in this case for over 5 years. And they finally said, okay, we lost every motion. We fought this for 5 years. We finally can't fight anymore. Let's test it. Well, he was not the killer. There's a definite DNA profile from the killer that was there all along. They wouldn't test it. They let him go. He died less than a year after being released.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, so Adnan could, there are ways you can file to have DNA tested, and Adnan could theoretically try that here. But 5 years is a pretty reasonable estimate of how long it'd take to get any results.
Yeah.
And so as we transition to question and answer, what do you, at the end of this very long process of working on a documentary and fighting and working on this case, what does the everyday person need to know about our justice system or about cases like Adnan's and the other people that we don't know, in terms of just being better prepared to understand what we can do to make a difference?
The system is broken. If you're innocent in prison, you have very, very small odds of ever going home.
Well, yeah.
The system's designed to keep you there. The system is designed to protect. If people hide evidence, well, in some jurisdictions, if you don't find that evidence within a year of being convicted, it doesn't matter. The state wins. The fact that the state hid evidence from you showing that you're innocent is meaningless.
But here's the thing, systems are run by people. And so it's all about the people in charge. The one thing I keep emphasizing over and over again, like everywhere I talk about this case, or wrongful convictions in general, people say, what can we do? The most important, impactful thing you can do is to understand who your district attorney is, who your local sheriff is, how long they've been in office, what does their work look like, when is the election, and get involved. There is no more powerful person in the entire system than that DA. That DA can completely, that one person can change the whole system in that jurisdiction. So getting involved in those elections is important. There are people I've met here who are like, I'm going to go to law school, I am a lawyer, and I want to say to them, go to law school and become a prosecutor.
Yeah.
Go to law school, if you're a lawyer, run for DA. Let's get a sea change in the system by putting the right people in charge of the system. So
If you're a defense attorney, try running for DA.
Yeah, defense attorneys, please, run for DA.
If that isn't a great endorsement for 2020 for these two, I don't know what is. So thank you so much.
So we should address the decision. The state court.
sorry?
We should address the decision.
The state court decision. Susan, would you like to tell us about the state court
I guess
decision?
we kind of, probably because we don't like talking about it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about
What happened?
the appeal that was just lost. Go ahead.
Yeah, so right before the documentary dropped, the very last business day before the documentary dropped, we'd had the hearing for a non-Supreme Court case, and we knew that maybe March or April or even June could be times when the decision would come out, but we didn't know exactly when. And I was really, really hoping that it would not come out until after the documentary. I just wanted to make sure that all the stuff we found was out there and like there for everyone to know when the decision came down. And then the very last day that they could have done it before the documentary came out, the Maryland Supreme Court issued its ruling and reinstated Adnan's conviction. I was in New York for the premiere, and I told Amy. I thought she knew, because I was on my phone, like, walking to get coffee. And I saw it as I texted Amy, I'm like, what do we do now? And she's like, what do you mean? Like, call me. And we had to do the event that night, and we were kind of like zombies. Like, we went through the motions, but we're like, how do you, like, it was hard to fake it, because it was so devastating.
Yeah, it did certainly put a real damper on all the premiere activities in our documentary, because we had premieres all over the country.
Do you
and
think
even
it was
in London.
deliberate?
I think the timing was probably, I think they wanted it out before the documentary, and I think because things happen and courts are slow, it was now or never. So I don't think they intended, I can't imagine they intended to have the day before the documentary aired. But I think that was likely a motivating factor. And not because of any nefarious reason, but because I think the court wanted to be able to say, hey, look, we're totally independent, we're not influenced by any documentary. If that came out before the decision did, they could not avoid accusations that they were influenced by it. So this way, they can make sure that they are not accused of being influenced by it.
So that decision came out on Friday, March 8th, and the 10th was a documentary premiere. On the 6th, which was that Wednesday, I was speaking to Adnan on the phone, and we were kind of joking about something, because we were like, well, the documentary's going to come out in a couple days. And he's like, do you think the decision will come out for the documentary? I'm like, no, we got like 2 days
There's
left.
no time left.
I was like, look, it's either going to they're either going to drop it right for the documentary, or they're going to wait like for months after, because they want to like have as much a distance from this documentary as possible. And we were just kind of laughing, because we're like, oh, there's no way. It's going to happen like in August, September. And then it happened, and it was shocking. It was shocking. And it was devastating in a way that it was just so unexpected. And The last 2 months has been really, really awful.
Yeah.
It's been the worst 2 months. It's been worse in a way than it even was before Serial. Because before Serial, it was like the kind of the slow motion. There was just no traction in the case. You're kind of like, maintaining the status quo all those years. And now we had this incredible momentum. And I literally, that same Wednesday, I was talking to Adnan about different issues related to reintegration and him coming home later this year. And so it's been bad.
The timing was also devastating in that one motion you can file is called a motion for consideration. They're very rarely granted, but this was an appropriate case to file it because the decision from the Maryland Supreme Court has devastating impacts for defendants all over Maryland. It is a novel decision. It's contrary to prior precedent. It's contrary to the precedent of the other 49 states and D.C. If adopted as the law, which it is now in Maryland the law, it will severely limit already severely limited access to the courts for those who were convicted. So the motion for consideration that was filed in the supporting briefs basically explained, like, here's the impacts, here's why this was never even briefed, here's why this was never even considered by the court, and here's why, if you let this stand, all these bad things will happen. Well, that motion for consideration was filed I think 30 days, which means right after the HBO documentary ended. So now the court really can't change its mind, because if it does, it will look exactly like it changed their mind because of the documentary. That court could never in any universe have granted the motion for consideration, because then they have to admit, or at least make it look like they changed their mind due to HBO. So yeah, that was never going to work.
Yeah, it's already having an impact on the defendant. Just this last week, in a couple of different cases, they're citing the decision. State views say they're citing this decision in order to turn down other defendants who have very valid claims. So we are going to be going to the Supreme Court of the United States in the next couple of months.
Yeah, well, it's unlikely. Very few cases of any sort ever get heard by the Supreme Court. Obviously, they're the highest court.
Yeah.
Everything goes there.
Yeah.
The odds of them accepting it are...
Haven't I come through?
Yeah, no, he's not coming through, and there's zero chance they'll take it.
You never know. I mean, it is the longest shot ever. There have been a lot of long shots in this case, though, so you never know. But
I hope they do. I don't want this to be the law elsewhere in Maryland or the U.S.
I think that's the fear. I mean, now it stands as the law in Maryland, but courts around the country can also rely on this. It's just bad law. It's just bad law. So, but beyond the Supreme Court, we're also looking already at getting back into state court and maybe federal court on other things, on like writs of actual innocence, on other post-convictions. We got plans.
Yeah,
We got
people
plans.
keep asking, like, what happens now? Is it over? No, it is absolutely
not over.
not over by any means.
So-
It's a setback, but there are many routes left.